Yo, what is going on, guys? Welcome back to another video, and in today's video I'm going to be doing a team up through Champions Path tier list video. Before we get into this, make sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel, really does help us out. We have a Twitter now, make sure to check that out. Check out our Discord, Twitch, Patreon, everything should be in the description. But without further ado, let's just get into this. So how it's going to work, so we have 7 tiers, S, A, B, C, D, E, and really, really bad. So, I'm going to just go through each deck, talk about it a little bit, and then place it where I think it is on the tier list. And we'll just see how it ends up at the end of the video. If you have your own opinions, make sure to place them in the comments below. Remember, this entire video is just my opinion. If you think I'm missing a deck, make sure to put that in the comments below as well. But without further ado, let's just get right into it. So, our first deck here, well, I guess we'll just go in whatever order they're placed in. So, our first deck is going to be Zacian with Lakarma Metal. I think Zacian Lakarma Metal is really good. I think it's definitely very, very good against the meta. Zacian's just a great card in general. Lakarma Metal is pretty good. It does relatively well against stuff like ADP and Eternatus, which are two of the biggest decks at the moment. Unfortunately, not super great against something like Centiskorch VMAX, but definitely really, really good. A great pick right now. A lot of this is if you are playing in the Players' Cup. Obviously, I cannot as I'm a senior, but if you are, this is generally a good tier list to go by. Zacian Lakarma Metal is a great deck to go in with because it'll counter the two most popular decks, and you'll be able to rack up a lot of wins. So that probably goes in A tier. It's a good deck. It's not good enough to be top tier, but it's definitely quite good. So the next deck on the list is Baby Blue Cephalon. I think Baby Blue Cephalon is a good anti-meta deck, although it's not consistent enough to be an A tier. I think, honestly, Baby Blue Cephalon is a C tier deck. It simply is not consistent enough and can't hit as many energies as it could pre-rotation, so I think that's why it's only in C tier. It might be in, I'm sure it would be in A tier or even S tier if we still had Fiery Flint in the format, but we don't, unfortunately, so it really can't possibly be any better than C tier. Its matchups are pretty okay across the board. ADP is slightly unfavored, but Eternatus and Zacian Metal and a lot of other decks are pretty good for you. There's not a super easy way to counter it without playing ADP or Vikavolt V. So that's definitely something to consider when you're playing the deck. But unfortunately, like I said, you can really just lose to anything out of nowhere because it is so inconsistent. Our next deck is going to be Zapdos, Moltres, and Articuno. It was kind of like a meme deck at one point. It kind of did well, but it really was not super great in the end. So I think that kind of goes in E tier. It's not an amazing deck. It's okay, but it seems very linear. It takes a terrible matchup to anything that plays lightning Pokemon. It's not great against like Eternatus or, I mean, it's okay against ADP, I guess. Maybe not even, but I think it's okay overall. Maybe nah, but I mean, it's an okay counter pick, kind of rogue deck, but it's not very good at all. I don't want to put it in really bad because it's definitely an okay, viable-ish deck. We probably won't have very many decks in really bad, so I think E-tier is fair for it. I really wouldn't recommend playing it at all, but if you like rogue decks, you may want to consider it. So our next deck is going to be straight Vikavolt V. I think straight Vikavolt is just completely outclassed by Pikachu and Zekrom. I think it's a D tier deck. It's okay against some decks like Baby Cephalon. It's quite good against, but against some things like ADP Zacian V, your opponent just has to find a couple cards twice to take 2 knockouts and win the game. I think it's not very good. It's just a D tier deck. It's okay. You can kind of manipulate the board, but without Electro Power or Thunder Mountain, it really just is not very good at all. Our next deck is going to be Excadrill Control, which I actually think is a very, very good deck if piloted correctly. If you make all the correct plays, it can beat every deck in the format. Maybe not ADP every time, but if you are playing it perfectly, I can confidently say that it will beat every deck if you draw well. I'm going to put it in C tier simply because it is so difficult to play well. It is just incredibly tough to play it optimally and have it be super good. That's just my thoughts on it. But I think that it takes really, really good matchups across the board. You can tech in like a normal Excadrill to help your Eternatus matchup kind of just sweep their board at some point with that. If they're unprepared for it, kind of control their energy, control their board state. You can also play it with Starly to help you search for cards. But I think overall Control is a pretty strong archetype, but it's incredibly difficult to play really, really well. And that's the only reason it's lower. If everyone could play it perfectly, it would almost certainly be A or even S tier. Our next deck is going to be Spiritomb Spikemuth, which I think is an okay deck, but it just really is not very good. It takes bad matchups to ADP, and it can kind of just lose to a deck that plays heavy Zigzagoon counts, or can do spread damage by placing damage counters or something, or just decks that reduce a lot of damage, like Zacian the Karma Metal just can't get up there. I really think it's okay. It's like an okay deck, but no matter with ADP, it simply is not very, very good at all. So our next deck is going to be Mewtwo Welder, which is definitely an A-tier deck. It's a super strong archetype, takes positive matchup to ADP Zacian, it takes an okay matchup to Eternatus. That's kind of what you want to see in a deck, especially like a Mewtwo variant that gets one-shotted by Eternatus quite easily. But I think that Mewtwo Welder is super strong. It's not S tier because it can still lose to things. It can brick sometimes. And while every deck can do that, I think that, I think that Mewtwo Welder specifically just is not a great card for that. Yeah, so that goes in A tier. I think the next deck we're going to talk about is Mad Party. I'm going to put this in C tier, because just like Excadrill and Baby Little Cephalon, kind of fringe decks, they kind of brick. Well, maybe not as much control, but it's difficult to play optimally. It's not amazing. You kind of brick sometimes, and it loses to ADP. Those are the main drawbacks. It's an incredibly strong deck. It takes positive matchups to Eternatus and some of the other powerful decks, but just in general, it can't consistently beat everything, which is what we're looking for in a deck. Next deck is going to be Garchomp Giratina. Now, surprisingly as it is, I'm going to put this in B tier. It's still kind of a rogue deck, but I think it's incredibly strong. You take positive Eternatus matchups, slightly favored ADPZ, okay Mewtwo matchup, okay Zacian the Karma Metal matchup. You do okay against like one prize decks because you can like snipe their bench and kind of manipulate the board state, force them to take prizes and reset stamp them. You do okay against stuff like, and you do amazing against Pikachu and Zekrom Eternatus because you can hit weakness with Marshall on the champ. I think it's kind of just like a versatile greens toolbox deck, and it's definitely worth a try if you kind of want to play something rogue-ish that does well against a lot of the meta. I would say it's kind of just a better Zapdos, Moltres, and Articuno deck. That's kind of how I would put it. So our first S tier deck is of course going to be ADP Zacian V. As much as I dislike the deck and think it kind of takes away from a lot of the creativity in the format, it's unchallenged as either the best or second best deck in the format. Probably to Eternatus. But it's super, super strong. Alter Creation is an absolutely broken attack. I think ADP takes really, really good matchups against mainly stuff like... it's okay against stuff like Pikachu and Zekrom, but it's really, really good against most fringe decks like Anaconda, Baby Blounds, Control, Mad Party, Vikavolt, Spiritomb, stuff like that. It's really, really good against. It doesn't always do great against like multi-prize rogue decks that can kind of counter it, but I think it's definitely a really, really strong pick. It's definitely the most popular deck right now. It's always an easy way to rack up wins if that's all you want for the Players' Cup. but I think it's definitely important to consider the deck and make sure your deck can either beat it or take like a 50-50 matchup to it, especially if you're playing a rogue deck. So our next deck is going to be Mewtwo Mew Psychic Box with Rotom. This Rotom, you can accelerate energy from your discard pile. Azul Garcia Griego just piloted it to a second place finish at the Sunday Open, and it's been having decent tournament results all around. I think it's I would honestly say it is a B tier deck. It's quite good. It can beat a lot of the meta. Trevenant Dusknoir in there can control the board state a lot. And I think it's just good against a lot of different stuff in general. You take pretty okay matchups to everything. But I wouldn't say it's A tier or S tier at all, because like it simply cannot. It simply just doesn't have a great turn 1 option that isn't just Energy Excel. And I think that's the only thing stopping it from being tier 1. If we still had Malamar, I think it could be quite strong. But even then, you still don't have like a turn 1 attacking options like Mewtwo Welder does, which is why Mewtwo Welder is just, in my opinion, significantly better. Our next deck is going to be Aerodactyl Golisopod or Aerodactyl Golisopod Altaria, whatever you want to play. I think it all ranks around the same, which is in B tier. It's a super strong deck. It definitely solidly beats stuff like Eternatus and Pikachu and Zekrom. It kind of takes an unfavorable Arceus Dialga Palkia matchup, but everything else, I say it really does have an answer for. Altara is super helpful. That new Champion's Path, Altara, is definitely pretty good. But I would definitely consider if you want to play something kind of rogue, but that's also really, really good. It's definitely great against a lot of the meta. Some decks just can't do anything against it. Games do take a little while, so if you're looking for fast wins, that really isn't the deck for you. But I think, just in general, it's a pretty good deck. So our next deck is going to be Pikachu and Zekrom. If you guys have been watching my streams recently, you'll know Pikachu and Zekrom is my absolute favorite deck at the moment. If I were to rank it, in my heart, it's honestly A tier. But I think just in general, it is a B tier deck. Simply because it takes a lot of losses to one prize card decks. It's not amazing against Eternatus or ADPization. I like to think it takes 50-50 to, or like 60 or 55-45 to ADP, and then maybe 45-55 to Eternatus. So it kind of evens out there. But yeah, I think Pikachu and Zekrom is an incredibly strong deck. You can kind of manipulate with Raichu. I have been getting a lot more into the Crushing Hammer variant recently, and that's been really, really good. But I think just in general, Pikrom's a great deck. No matter what format you're playing in, Lightning with Tapu Koko Prism is just great. Those are just my thoughts. But I think Full Blitz is a great attack. It does pretty well against multi-prize decks. Like it takes a pretty good Zacian Lucario matchup. It does amazing against like I don't know, like Zapmo Kuno stuff. And it's generally quite fast, so slower decks normally can't keep up with it. So the next deck I want to talk about is Anaconda. I'm going to put Anaconda in D tier simply because it's horrible against ADP. It does really, really well against Eternatus. Actually, I kind of think it's around there, yeah. But just getting completely gate-kept by ADP and then isn't amazing against the rest of the meta. Like, 85-15 Eternatus matchup is absolutely amazing, but everything else kind of is just mediocre. So that's why it's in D tier. So for Inteleon, I'm going to put Inteleon in B tier as well, or in B tier, simply because it's good against like ADP and Eternatus. Probably takes like 60-40 matchups to both of those, but isn't great against stuff like Pikachu and Zekrom. Vikavolt is not very good. It's not amazing against stuff like one prize decks. It's not amazing against Mewtwo or Zacian Lucario Metal. But I think it's just like okay in general. Like taking losses to 2 out of like the maybe like 6 biggest decks is like amazing, but I guess we'll kind of see how the tier list shapes up, and maybe we'll move it depending on how the rest of the tier list looks. But for now, it's a B tier deck for me. It's not amazing, but yeah. So the reason I put Rowlet and the Lone Executor on the tier list is simply because it's simply because it top-8'd the Sunday Open. I think it's just not a great deck. I assume the player just got lucky, but maybe it's actually a really good deck. I may be testing it in the future. I'm really not sure. But I think it's a cool deck. It's a cool rogue deck. I just don't think it's very good. It probably doesn't take amazing matchups to like Zacian, Lacrima, Metal, or Eternatus. But I mean, I really don't know how it shapes up against the rest of the meta because I haven't really tested it. But from what I'd guess, it's just not strong enough to compete with the rest of the meta. But it's an okay rogue deck. Our next deck is going to be Draggable V. So in an Eternatus banned format, I feel like it would completely rule the format. But with Eternatus, it obviously takes like a 90-10 matchup, or maybe like 80-20, or maybe even something like maybe like 60-40 if you're playing a bunch of Energy Denial like Crushing Hammer and either Clefable or Lycanroc. But I think it's an okay deck. It's still not like amazing against ADP. You can totally win that matchup. But just in general, it's not like the most amazing deck. It's still a cool rogue deck, but it simply can't compete with a lot of the meta, with Eternatus being almost a quarter of the decks. So our first heavily Champions Path Center deck is going to be Wailord V. You can either play this as like the Greens variant by just using Wailord V, or you can totally play it with Frostmoth, which is almost certainly the better variant. I'm going to put Wailord in C tier simply because it isn't like an amazing deck, but it's strong. It can one-shot anything with a couple lucky coin flips. But I think it's kind of like halfway between competitively viable and a meme deck. I just don't think it's on the same level as something like Inteleon VMAX. Because you don't take an amazing matchup to like anything Lightning, obviously, because you're weak to Lightning. Your Mewtwo, or there are just some matchups that can get pretty sketch if you don't flip amazingly. And that's kind of just my thoughts on the deck. It's kind of mediocre. Our next deck is going to be Dreadnought VMAX, which I'm going to put in D tier as well. It's an okay deck, once again, weak to Lightning, and I feel like it's just outclassed by Inteleon, which is kind of just like a VMAX that's also tanky and does like 160, because I feel like 240 is not that much more than 160, which is kind of unfortunate, because you're kind of hitting like 240 like 60% of the time, like Glim with Tangle, not Glim with Tangle, depends on what you have in play. I think Inteleon VMAX is just better, and it's kind of slow, it's kind of clunky. Of course, Inteleon is too, but I feel like Inteleon with that bench damage, you have a little more spreading capability, and it's just better in general. So that's why I put Dreadnought in D tier. Next deck is going to be Gardevoir VMAX. I think Gardevoir is a really, really bad deck because you take weakness to Zacian V, and then you're not one-shotting anything crazy. You can do a lot of healing, but you still can't like heal all of your health, and so Eternatus is able to two-shot you pretty easily, and you kind of just run out of resources, and you can never finish the game, as far as I can tell. So it's just a bad deck, I think. Honestly, I think it's just so bad. I'm just going to put that in really, really bad, because it's just not good. Alcremie VMAX, on the other hand, slightly better than Gardevoir, but I still would not say it is worth anything at all. I'm going to put that in E tier. Like, the Gardevoir and Alcremie, both weak to Zacian, both get one-shotted by the most popular card, or the most popular Pokemon, arguably, in the entire format. Right now, it's just not a loss you want to have to take. And that's just my thoughts on those two decks. They're both not amazing. They can, and I think the only reason Alcremie is higher than Gardevoir is because it can dish out one-hit KOs. That's just the only reason it's E tier on the tier list, as opposed to really, really bad. But those are just my thoughts on the deck. So the next deck is going to be Altaria Obstagoon, which I think is really good. I would say Altaria Obstagoon is honestly an A tier deck. It's quite strong. It can counter a lot of the meta. There are some things you just unfortunately have to accept a loss to. Like, I think like Centiskorch is a really, really bad matchup, considering that no matter what you do, Altaria is getting one-shotted by Volcanion, and Centiskorch one-shots Obstagoon pretty much all the time. All they need is like Welder attachment, supposing they start with just a V in play, and then obviously the VMAX. But yeah, so I think it's an incredibly strong deck. You have a good ADP and alternatives matchup, and I think that's kind of just where I stand on the deck at the moment. So like Galarian Curse Levy, Energy Denial, Spread. I think it's an E tier deck. It's just not good enough to compete viably. That's just my thoughts. It's really just not good. You can spread, but you're not. I just feel like you're never able to take down something like ADP, and you probably only win against Eternatus like 45 to 50% of the time. You probably do better against like one prize decks like Baby Valence and Spiritomb, or even like Mad Party, but just in general, I just feel like it really isn't very good at all against something like Dreadnought VMAX or Dragapult VMAX or Zacian Lakarma Metal, especially with those metal goggles, or even like Mewtwo, even though you can't hit weakness for like 120, which is okay. But it's like an okay deck, but I think it's still really, really bad. So Green's Pikachu and Zekrom, I think it is also B tier, because it's like a Pikarom deck. It's kind of just like Pikachu and Zekrom. It just won the Open. I think it's strong. You can play Energy now. You have easy search. Kind of susceptible to Marnie Stamp if you miss Supporter, but I think it's a pretty strong deck. Just in general, probably has mostly the same matchups as Pikachu and Zekrom, and so that's kind of just like my thoughts on the deck. It's just kind of around B tier, pretty good, but not like A tier material. So the other S tier deck is, of course, Eternatus VMAX. It's incredible, dished out insane amounts of damage for 2 energy. It's effectively a stage 1 Pokemon of VMAX, of course. Has an amazing ability. It's a pretty consistent deck if played correctly. It takes it's like 50-50 to ADP. Kind of unfavored versus like Zacian Lakarma Metal. Pretty good against Mewtwo. Okay against like Altaria decks. Okay against, I don't know, like most Mewtwo variants. Pikachu and Zekrom it's pretty good against. And then the rest of the meta, it's kind of a coin flip, because as you get lower, some decks are explicitly countering ADP and Eternatus, but I think Eternatus is still incredibly strong. You have a good chance to beat anything because you're so fast, and you kind of just do whatever you want, honestly. Decidueye, I think Decidueye is also in an A-tier deck. Decidueye Obstagoon and Altaria Obstagoon. You can really play either variant of the deck, because Decidueye can dish out more damage and do spread, while Altaria is just easier to get into play. I see no reason Decidueye Obstagoon should drop from A tier. But that's just my opinion on the deck. I guess you could drop Decigoons into B tier, because Altaria is just faster, but I don't see any reason Decigoons should drop into B tier because Altaria came into the format. I think Altaria is the superior variant of the two, simply because it's easier to get into play, but it really depends on the meta and what's doing really well at the moment. Like, I think Decidueye is a little better against Eternatus, because Altaria can't one-shot stuff like Eternatus' Baby Hoopas or Yveltal, whereas Decidueye can do that with the help of some Zigzagoons or a ping to the bench at some point. So that's just my thoughts on the deck. Salaman's VMAX, Salaman's VMAX, it's okay. I think it's a D tier deck. It's not amazing, but it can do some cool stuff with the special energies, like Powerful and Triple Acceleration. It's okay against a lot of the meta. It's not like great, but it's like okay. It does okay against stuff like, I don't know, it does okay against like Garchomp Giratina, Zacian Lakarma Metal, ADP, stuff like that, but I think just in general, it's not a good deck. It just gets outclassed by Eternatus VMAX. Centiskorch VMAX, another A-tier deck. It dishes out huge damage, you tank, you can heal, you can disrupt. There are so many different ways to play the deck. It's quite good. Not too much to be said. You do lose to stuff like Inteleon Wailord and Dreadnought, but then you take positive matchups to like Zacian Lakarma Metal. I like to think you take a pretty good matchup to ADP. If you don't overbench, you take a pretty good matchup to Garchomp Giratina. Take a pretty good matchup to Pikachu and Zekroms. And yeah, that's kind of just how the deck goes. So our next deck is going to be the Rhyperior Melodic Torkoal Counter Toolbox. I'm going to put that in A tier as well. I think it's a super strong deck. Or actually, no. I think it's kind of more B tier deck. I think it's, like, okay. It's, like, kind of meh. But I think in general it's really good against the majority of decks, but once you come up like something counter meta, like Aerodactyl or Mewtwo isn't really counter meta, but like you don't really have like an easy answer for Mewtwo. You can totally disrupt them and stuff, but like if you come up against something like say Draggable V, you really have no answer to that. Or even like Dreadnought V at this point, you really have like no answer. And I think that's kind of just what you have to do if you're playing one of those counter box decks, which is the only reason I would say it's not in A tier. The next deck is going to be Trevenant Dusknoir Obstagoon with that new Obstagoon that forces your opponent to discard cards in their hand. I think it still goes in really bad. It's worth a try, but it's a bad deck. It just is. You don't take amazing matchups to anything that kind of just draws okay, but once you get your lock off, it's quite powerful. But up until that point, it just isn't, unfortunately. Gardevoir Sylveon also goes in really, really bad, simply because it just doesn't dish out enough damage, takes weakness to Zacian. I thought I'd put it in here because it's seen a little bit of hype recently, but it really just is not good enough. It gets one-shotted and can't one-shot, and at the end of the day, that's just what this format is. You one-shot or you get one-shotted and lose, especially when you're playing a tag team Pokemon that doesn't have, like, super easy to access disruption stuff or spread stuff like Dragapult does. And I think that's kind of just where it stands at the moment. So Water Mewtwo, Blastoise GX Mewtwo with Frostmoth, I think that's E tier. It's just not a good deck. It simply cannot keep up with the rest of the meta. It's definitely an okay deck, but I just think it is not good enough to keep up with the rest of the meta. And the final deck is going to be Lapras VMAX, which I think is a bad deck. It is worse than Inteleon and Dreadnought. And that's just my thoughts on the deck. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Make sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel. It really does help us out. Tell me what you thought of this tier list in the comments below. Leave your personal opinions. I appreciate every comment that you guys leave. Let me know what you thought about this video. I really, I'm hoping to make more content when I'm coming back, but school's been pretty difficult so far in terms of like keeping a consistent schedule that includes making videos. So I hope that while you guys enjoy this video, I'd really appreciate it if you could leave some ideas in the comments below, because I really have no idea what you guys want to see right now. Please do go follow my Twitch channel. We're getting pretty close to affiliate, and I'd really appreciate it if we could hit it soon. I've got some great rewards planned. But I think that's going to do it for this video. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.